Hey everybody, welcome back. So today we're going to be looking at the Xinjiang province in China to try to start to get an idea about how authoritarian governments respond to perceived terrorist threats. And I think this is a really good case study to see the extremes that authoritarian governments will go to try to repress groups of people that they think might potentially be threatening and might be willing to engage in terrorism. And in some instances, as we'll talk about today, there have been terrorist incidents in China, but we'll see the extreme response that the Chinese government has been willing to take. So, why are we going to look at the Xinjiang province in China? Well, Xinjiang, as we see here, is a region in northwestern China that really only became part of China after World War II. With the Communist Revolution, the institution of a dictatorship in China, they managed to conquer the Xinjiang province and make it part of China after World War II. And what's interesting about this is that Xinjiang is made up primarily of an ethnic group called the Uyghurs. And the Uyghurs are a Turkic people who are primarily Muslim. And this differs significantly from the rest of China, where the rest of China is predominantly ethnically Han Chinese. Individuals are either not religious, Taoist, some elements of Buddhism. So there's a pretty significant ethnic and cultural differences between a lot of the rest of China and this region of Xinjiang where it's primarily ethnic Uyghurs. And so there has been a fairly steady push over a long period of time in the region to try to regain independence that it lost after China conquered the territory. And this is primarily led by the Turkestan Islamic Party. And this group has really advocated for Uyghur independence and the independence of Xinjiang. And the Chinese government has not been willing to consider any sort of autonomy, any sort of independence for Xinjiang province. And this has led to pretty substantial conflicts in the past, with a number of terrorist incidents being carried out in China in the name of Uyghur independence of Xinjiang. And the Chinese government really doesn't have any interest or willingness to allow Xinjiang to become an independent state for a couple reasons. And one of those is primarily because of Xinjiang's key location and key placement in China for its attempt to try to develop its truly global economic might. And if any of you have ever heard of the Belt and Road Initiative, this is a economic political initiative that the Chinese have begun. Plans of it started, it's estimated early 2000s, but really after 2010 it started to accelerate. And this is really an attempt by China to link itself inextricably with the rest of the world and establish its global economic dominance. And what's important to know is there's a lot of different routes that China is trying to establish trade links. And one of those especially is building what it sees as it calls the New Eurasia Land Bridge, as you can see here. Traveling from China, Beijing, there will be tributaries of this throughout China. But as we see, it ends up traveling here through northwest China, through Xinjiang province, to the Middle East, to Western and Eastern Europe, to Russia. And so Xinjiang is a significantly important piece for their new economic initiative. And so the Chinese government, authoritarian government, has thus been very unwilling to consider any form of autonomy or independence because they don't want to risk losing this very important territory because it's a key component in their economic and political ambitions for greater global influence. So, what have they done in response to these terrorist attacks by ethnic Uyghurs in the Uyghur independence movement? Well, they've taken a lot of extremely harsh steps. It's estimated that they have interned in what a lot of scholars call concentration camps, over 1 million men and boys. And they have done this. This is picture here is some satellite footage of what's believed to be some of these facilities where they are keeping these individuals in prison. The Chinese don't call them concentration camps, of course, they call them re-education centers. And this is where it's argued they really are trying to minimize the influence that Islamic education and Islam is having on the population, because they see this as a crucial component for the ethnic Uyghurs and the Uyghur independence movement to try to justify their separation from China, that they are culturally, religiously different than the Chinese, so they should have and achieve independence. And so they've really tried to engage in what they consider and what is actually forcible re-education to try to encourage these individuals to abandon Islam and to accept the Chinese government. And it's the 1 million people in turn is what's believed to actually be a conservative estimate. There's some who argue it could be much, much more, and many more people who are imprisoned in these quote unquote re-education centers. The Chinese government has taken a number of other steps to try to limit the influence of Islam and diminish the motivation for wanting independence. And one of those is they have banned Arabic art in Xinjiang province, and they have done this because in Islam the primary language is Arabic. So when you go to a Muslim mosque anywhere around the world, you're going to find Arabic writing, and the Chinese have attempted to ban Arabic art as another means of limiting the influence of Islam in Chinese society, in Uyghur society, to try to encourage assimilation into the Chinese state and acceptance of the Chinese government. They've also banned Islamic private schools, and these are another important feature in a lot of Islamic societies, Islamic communities, where they have schools that teach individuals about the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, teach them about the Quran, teach them about various important elements of Islam. And so not only is China forcibly trying to quote unquote re-educate individuals in these internment camps, those individuals who are not actually interned cannot actually receive an Islamic private education in China. Again, to try to limit this influence on potential Uyghurs from wanting to gain independence. And they've also banned the name Muhammad. Muhammad is the most common name in the world and is the most popular name for people who belong to the Islamic faith to name their children. And so by banning the name Muhammad, they're really, again, trying to forcibly assimilate Uyghurs into the broader Chinese, what the Chinese government sees as Chinese society. And this is something that they're really trying hard to do. Again, we see with just simply banning the names that people can give to their children. And then another tactic that they've used extensively based on their capacities to essentially do what they want as an authoritarian government is engage in mass surveillance. And this mass surveillance has played an important role in their attempts to try to identify and find individuals who they think are potential threats. But it also allows them to just simply monitor anyone that they want in Chinese, in Xinjiang, and who they think could potentially be threats. And in a lot of ways, we talked about this issue with mass surveillance when we discussed the USA Patriot Act, but here it's taken even further to extreme, where there is no real checks or any ways to lobby the government, push Congress for change, to limit these programs. The Chinese government can do these and engage in these programs of mass surveillance without a real fear that the people have any influence in trying to change them. So really has been mass surveillance. It's been said that there are cameras on every single street corner. They use these extensively to not only monitor Uyghurs, but also monitor people. A lot of journalists who have gone to the region have said that they were under surveillance the entire time they were there while they were trying to report on the particular internment of the Uyghurs. So this is really an extensive program by the Chinese government to try to limit any sort of what they perceive as security threat to their control over Xinjiang province. And so there's just a few things, but we can really see here, I think, with this case study, the extent to which authoritarian governments are willing to go to try and stop what they perceive as terrorist groups, and really will essentially monitor an entire society and intern millions of people to try to stop what they perceive as a terrorist threat. So I'll leave it there for now and finish with the final discussion question of the day, and that is, in what circumstances do you think an authoritarian government like China would grant concessions to a group like the Uyghurs? Again, discussion question 3. In what circumstances do you think an authoritarian government would grant concessions to a group like the Uyghurs? Here I talked a lot about what they're doing to repress them, but I'm interested to see what you think, and when you think they'd be willing to grant concessions. We'll leave it there for today. Thanks so much for listening.